There's not many natural disaster spells, or at least nothing in the sense of specifically targeting terrain and effects. Like take Meteor Swarm, for example. It does a lot and covers a big area, but it strictly, a lot of its rules revolve around just the damage aspect of it, which makes sense. It's evocation most of the time. But if you did want I want to level a city or a village or a district spell, welcome to Earthquake.
And kind of go in here at the bottom.
8th level evocation, casting time of 1 action, range of 500 feet, components verbal somatic, material, a pinch of dirt, a piece of rock, and a lump of clay. Duration, concentration, up to 1 minute. You create a seismic disturbance at a point of the ground that you can see within range. For the duration, an intense tremor rips through the ground in a 100-foot radius circled center on that point and shakes creatures and structures in contact with ground in that area. The ground in the area becomes difficult terrain. Each creature on the ground that is concentrating must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the creature's concentration is broken. When you cast this spell, and at the end of each turn you spend concentrating on it, each creature on the ground in the area must make a Dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is knocked prone. This spell can have additional effects depending on the terrain in the area, as determined by the DM. Fissures. Fissures open throughout the spell's area at the start of your next turn. After you cast the spell, a total of 1d6 such fissures open in locations chosen by the DM. Each is 1d10 times 10 feet deep, 10 feet wide, and extends from one edge of the spell's area to the opposite side. A creature standing on a spot where a fissure opens must succeed on a Dexterity saving throw or fall in. A creature that successfully saves moves with the fissure's edges as it opens. A fissure that opens beneath the structure causes it to automatically collapse. See below. Structure. The tremor deals 50 bludgeoning damage to any structure in contact with the ground in the area when you cast this spell and at the start of each of your turns till the spell ends. If a structure drops to 0 hit points, it collapses and potentially damages nearby creatures. A creature within half the distance of a structure's height must make a Dexterity saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 5d6 bludgeoning damage, is knocked prone, and is buried under the rubble, requiring a DC 20 Strength Athletics check as an action to escape. The DM can adjust the DC higher or lower depending on the nature of the rubble. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage, it doesn't fall prone, or become buried. Alright, so. I bet you didn't think we were going to talk about the Underdark with this one. Spell's not bad! I'd assume this would be 9th level. Just because action, 500-foot range, 100-foot radius, concentration up for a minute. And this is a concentration really worth it. Namely because you won't actively be casting this where you're standing or in combat. This is an opener. It could also be a panic in the moment that you're also risking to cast it where you are, but the collateral, this is the collateral damage spell. This is the, I don't want to damage a single target. I do not care. This entire area is gone. One thing that comes up in questioning is the concentration roll. So yes, when you cast the spell and a creature concentrating on something needs to make a concentration check. The debate, and I'd leave it up to the DMs, because it doesn't specifically say, though it does for the prone, is whether you have to make that save every round it's going on. As you know, I get that there's arguments in both cases of it's sudden, so you might lose concentration, but then you get used to it and hold it. Or arguments for the consistent shaking and terrain changing around you. It is very distracting, and an earthquake is very distracting. The knocking prone, oh boy does that hurt. Every round have a chance to knock every creature in a 100-foot radius prone. Nice. The material components as well, very cheap. You could probably just dig that up or find it. It's not an expensive material, it doesn't cost a gold cost, it's not super rare, it's not just difficult to find. It's really dirt, rock, and clay. Not consumed either. There's also the additional feature of it's a 100-foot radius of difficult terrain. Not to mention it can still knock creatures prone, so even when they can move, it's not far. There is the issue that on flying enemies, this is going to have no effect. Just none. There is the question of burrowing enemies. Would the burrowing still cause difficult terrain? Because I would say it does, because it's all still shaking. Now also for covering the additional effects briefly, so we can get on to the main meat of the discussion. Fissures, terrifying. Being able to entirely manipulate and terraform the landscape, and that these don't go away after the concentration. The land doesn't heal back up. And yeah, it might not be too bad, like battle map wise when you're thinking about it in a grand scale, but the after effects, depending on where you're casting this, 1d6 such fissures, 1d10 times 10 for depth, and they're 10 feet wide. You can have a 100-foot drop, 10 feet wide canyon. I know jump rules don't come up that often, but this is a spell that forces creatures to recognize jump rules. And if they fail, that's 10d6! Which might not seem that grand for an 8th level spell, and also not guaranteed because they can make a dex save to stay on the edge, but man, if it hits a structure as well, guaranteed the structure goes down. While the spell, we're already going to get to the fact this specifically has damage against structures later on. A fissure, guaranteed collapses. Guaranteed. And then that just stays there. Not to mention, the fissures go from one end to the other. One end to the other. That is a 200-foot long canyon you have just made. This landscape is going to be scarred. Now it comes to the structures. Notice the wording of just structures. That's going to come important. 50 damage! 50 damage per round! Not to mention, if the fissure goes under, again, that's just one hit KO, structure's gone. And not just gone, it's collapsing. Which also happens if it runs out of health and is collapsing. Yeah, structure health is something very, very vague in 5e. Most of the time you can like ballpark it, home rule it, but there is a section that covers like some details of it. But the fact that half its height, so a small village, yeah, not too much. In a city, oh my gosh, that is covering everything. Big wizard tower, and the other fact is it's not necessarily artificial structures. Let's say you're in the Underdark, a mountain range, mountain peaks, cliff sides? Let's say you're already in a canyon casting this. You could have a you could have a cliffside, depending on how you want to rule if that's a structure or not, collapse. And if you're not okay with that being a structure because it's connected to a larger body of land outside of it, fair enough. Stalagmites? Stalagmite I would call a structure. This collapses on you, 5d6, again, alright, it's half the damage if you have the max depth of a fissure as well. So fine, 5d6. The thing is though, they're prone, and then also stuck under rubble. They're restrained. Now this could be a benefit or downside. It's not based off your spell save, and it can fluctuate depending on the DM. DC 20 athletics check being the base? It's pretty good. Not to mention, depending on what falls on, then the DM can rule lighter or otherwise. Like again, Village Hut, I would probably rule that as a lighter DC. But then that Wizard's Tower city or in a cave system, oh, that DC is going up. Or Avalanche? The avalanches. All right, well, yes, this can decimate a city terrain greatly. Not to mention the people and casualties caught within it. Because again, while yes, in a strict battle sense or going against a boss, it might not affect them too much, especially if they have fly or just a huge tank of health. High strength, whatever. This is a good war crime spell. I know that's not a thing to bring up. Maybe not war crime, total war spell. Is if you're, hey, I do not care about hitting these guards, I'm just affecting civilians. Again, city, village, town, mine, dwarven stronghold, someone next to a precarious cliff, someone next to an avalanche danger territory. Your local commoners packed into a dense urban landscape or cityscape, that 5d6, not to mention if it is also a ravine as well, they are not making it out of that. They are not making it out of that. 100-foot radius, 500 feet range. You don't have to be anywhere close. The only real downside to the range, it has to be a point you can see within range. Only when casting though, not holding concentration. So you can lose sight of it after you cast. You can cast this, have someone teleport you out. Or just teleport out. You can cast this war crime and then leave. You do not need to stay within range. Cast it and book it. 8th level, at max level, you could still burn a 9th level spell slot on this as well, getting 2 in a day. Now, on the warfare scale of things, or if you're not attacking a boss and you're just hitting an evil empire, though evil empire is a debatable term and all empires evil, not touching that. Either as a villain with Earthquake or players just wanting to hit war camps or just in lore with powerful spellcasters, you do not need to go into like a big battlefield setting. A mage can just come in, oh look, natural disaster, leave, and just every day or every long rest, depending on the setting, come in and slowly chip away and destroy cities in large sections of war camps, bastions, castles. You have natural disasters at a whim depending on a long rest. and mobility that could strike at almost any time because it's an action. Range of 500 feet. They don't have to be that close to the location. And when it does come to boss fights, and not just that worldly battle category, when my players have cast this in a boss fight area, got rid of a bunch of the ads, but it entirely changed the battlefield. The ads that could fly or weren't necessarily close by came in a bit later. But now on the battlefield, you had the rubble acting as some barricades or difficult terrain still. You then also had the massive ravines, which changed the battle map, where you had these massive gashes. I mean, they were high levels, so you could get fly and stuff, but then when Dispel Magic came into the picture, it changed the entire dynamic of a boss fight. Now hopping back to world building and players using this, and something that doesn't come too much into consideration depending on... It's just something I don't think Wizards took into account when coming up with the spell, is if you're underground. Or again, the avalanche situation or natural terrain and structures. Hell, you could be in a forest and you could still have a debate on whether a tree counts as one of these structures falling on someone. Like, if you're not in just an open field, a lot of things would count as structures. And again, underground, underdark. Let's say the cave is not over 100 feet tall. It would then be caught in the radius, if it is just affecting the ground. And there's also the question of, does it ripple out over that 100 feet if it is something drastic enough or a structure falls out of it? But you're in a cave, or the Underdark, or in a section where you're in an enclosed space, or even just a massive building structure that has a large area. If the roof is also caught in that 100 feet, 1, the fissures also split up there, 2, structures up there would also fall. And listen, there's an encounter I never got the chance to use. I'm hoping you guys can use it. Or I can still use it someday. Underdark, some spellcaster with Earthquake, casting this, and specifically targeting spot on the roof for stalagmites to fall. Or not even stalagmites, just for the fissures to open up and earth and rubble and rock just to collapse, or break open into another cave system. And if we're talking about infrastructure, I mean, we already talked about targeting cities. Target dams, if your setting has, like, massive dams or something like that. There is also the question to take into mind of how many powerful spellcasters do you have? And do places like that kind of infrastructure have defenses against these? Because a spellcaster just popping in, casting Earthquake, and there goes a dam and several towns washed away under it, or an entire entrance to a dwarven stronghold collapsing, or a mine collapsing in on itself, killing everyone inside. A drow city which is now just rubble because the roof collapsed on it. What is the limits of this spell? Do you now see why I think it should have been like 9th level? Because just for sheer collateral, this outpaces Meteor Swarm. Avalanche, bastion walls, already existing canyons, cliff sides, caves, dwarven strongholds, any city, urban environment, really. 9 out of 10. Because, look, it'd be 10 out of 10 if it was just an NPC and world building side of things. This is a war crime spell. This is I want to decimate the city and populace and do this every long rest. If you have a high enough spellcaster to do it. But when it comes to players, the utility is a bit more limited depending on what the party's doing, and in active combat, especially at higher levels with fly, mobility, and other things can get past this. So it's going to go down to 9 out of 10. But, yeah. And if this description of Earthquake has changed your mind on its capabilities and the sheer capability of spellcasters and their effect on a setting if they're high enough level, mention it below, because I should make that video, honestly, because spellcasters change the game so much. And I mean a metaphorical game. I mean in the world building, and then if you want that video as well, mention it below, but whew. 9 out of 10.